Alright, just want to do a mid-process update. As you can see, I moved my camera again. I'd like to keep it away from the dust as much as possible while I'm not recording. Got my John Deere backdrop again, but anyway, this is where we're at. If I can get that to focus. I just kind of want to show you, we've taken the grind line down to about mid-spine, a little bit past, which is fine. I definitely like more than less as far as that's concerned. But I wanted to kind of show you how the grind line's a little bit uneven here, which is due mostly to my lack of experience. I am pleased with the plunge cut thus far. That's turning out nice. But I did want to just make a quick comment on this. You will have a little bit of uneven grinding if you're anything like me. I just want to make that a reference point. I am going to smooth that out now, as well as maybe take this grind line down just a little bit more on this end. And then hopefully we'll get close to our final grind prior to heat treat. Although we won't be heat treating this mild steel. It's going to be the same idea with the 1095. I'm just not going to film that. But you can kind of see the final shape taking place. Very pleased with how that's looking. We're going to go ahead and finish up our grinds, and then I will turn the camera back on and show you what it looks like. Alright, just spent a couple more minutes on the grinder, just touching the blade up. And as you can see, I was able to, well, if we can get that to focus a little better. I was able to even those grind lines out fairly nicely. Sorry about the focusing, but you get the idea. That's pretty much the final blade shape I'm looking for, grind line wise. I wouldn't mind if this was a little more parallel all the way to the tip, but that's definitely acceptable. I think that looks real nice. And if this were 1095, we'd pretty much be ready for heat treat. The only other option, I do kind of like how the 120 grit belt showing up with the grind lines. I do have some lighter grits. Maybe for some other knives I would go lighter just to take some of those grind lines down. Just kind of soften them up a little bit. But as you can see, well, maybe you can see, we fairly maintained our thickness all the way down. One thing I will note, sometimes as you get towards the tip, I think a lot of guys have a tendency, myself included, to thin the tip down a little bit more than the rest of it. Pretty easy solution for bringing it back to width is simply to grind a little bit more off than was already there. It changes the shape slightly, but that will widen your steel out if it needs to be widened. And typically it won't affect the blade shape enough to really make a difference, as you usually won't need much adjustment. One thing I will also note as we're, maybe we'll go back over to the grinder real quick. I just want to make note of this. I didn't really touch on it specifically, I don't think. But while you are grinding, just to make sure that your grind line is reasonably straight on this end. Like I said, I kept this pretty much perpendicular on the flattest part. Just make sure your point doesn't drop up or down as you're going across. Sometimes, especially if you're using the table method, you get kind of used to things, and if you slide off a little bit, you can notice how the tip could go up or down. You just kind of want to watch your point as you're going across and make sure that stays at the same level on the belt, and then just carefully move it inwards, and your grind line should turn out nice and sharp. Also, it does get easier as you go along because you do create kind of a divot that follows the shape of the wheel, and the larger that gets, the easier it is to hold a flat grind, or a smooth grind I should say. This is a hollow grind, not a flat grind, but it does get easier as the grind gets bigger because it will follow the shape of the wheel and kind of lock in there just a little bit better. And I just want to show, if that'll focus, the tip there. You can see how it does taper to a pretty sharp point. And once I get my final edge on there, that should be a very adequate point for piercing and cutting. So like I said, next step, if this were 1095, would be heat treating, and then maybe we'd do some final finishing and put an edge on it. I'm going to go ahead and try to do the 1095 now, maybe get one or two of those ground out like this one. Very happy with how this looks, and hopefully I can do the same or better on the rest. I think it definitely helped to get a practice grind in before I started. Got a few seconds of tape left here, so I just wanted to show you the 1095 hollow grind. Pretty pleased with how it came out. Not as sharp as I would like it in some places, but it'll definitely do. I think we're now ready for heat treat, so that'll be the next series of videos. One thing to keep in mind when you're grinding is not to overwork things. I mean, there is a certain point that you can fix any mistakes, but don't get too crazy trying to make it extremely perfect, or you won't have nothing left when you're done. I kind of had to cut this off before I got it exactly where I want it, but really overall I'm very pleased with the final result. After we heat treat it, put the edge on it and buff it up and do the final finishing, I think this will make a really nice knife. So that's going to be it for tonight. I'm going to call it a night, and we'll see where we get with the next videos. Right, this is going to be the heat treating stage of my first neck knife. As you can see, it's in the oven on a soft fire brick that I notched out. I've not turned the coil on yet, just for a little bit earlier, but it's at 181. We'll get that fired up here in a second. There's my quenching oil. It's just some Walmart brand vegetable oil. I'm going to go ahead and heat that up to about 120 to 150, somewhere in between there. As you can see, that's getting close, and then we'll go ahead and quench our blade once we get up to temperature. Alright, we're a little bit past the midpoint of our heat treating process. I got the knife cooking in my oven there. I got my makeshift door set in place, and zoom in on the temperature reading here. We're at about 1425. I got it set a little bit higher than the optimum temperature. I want to set it to 1475 for quenching this steel. There is a little bit of play in my controller. I think I need to adjust it some, but that setting right there should get me right at about 1475 and holding. I got my oil cooking still. It's right at 125 on the lowest setting of my hot plate there, and that should be just about perfect for quenching. I'll transfer it to my little quenching canister there, and then we will pull the blade out, drop it in, see what happens. So just a few more minutes. We're at 1442, 43 and rising. I should also mention I put the blade in before I turned my oven on, so it's coming up to temperature along with the oven. When we reach 1475 or so, I'm going to let it soak for a few minutes just to make sure the blade is fully up to temperature, and then we will quench. Alright, let's transfer the oil to my quenching can. Probably dump it everywhere. Nice. We're about 125 degrees. I imagine that will drop in the time it takes me to quench. Alright. This is going to be awesome. Don't know what's going to happen. Safety first. How's that showing up?
Pretty red.
Got a little bit of scale, it's red hot. Should be about 1475. Let's do this. Alright, as you can see, the can was a little shallow, but it's only the back end of the handle. Definitely not a huge deal. I have to drill a lanyard hole there anyway, so that'll probably be advantageous. It's definitely more uneventful than I thought it would be. There were no sparks or bubbles, but hopefully that worked. We'll see.